Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Steyer-Walt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Inkstained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, obligatory smoke in the air, small talk, go.
I just want to say I was very pleased to have somebody message me on Twitter to say, you didn't say what kind of Amazon workout gear that you were recommending.
Okay.
And there's so many brands. And I was happy to, reply and recommend. And then somebody messaged me saying, I want to buy a knockoff Chinese bag for my wife. How do I do it? So I'm just happy to be spreading,
But how does the smoke in the, you're supposed to talk about the smoke in the air. All anybody wants to talk about is the fact that it's smoky in town.
I'm like, I don't care.
There's always smoke in the air in Washington, but it's usually weed smoke. So this is, for me, a nice diversion to have Canadian wood smoke. Actually, Canadian wood smoke is the name of Colin Chicola's memoir.
It's true.
But anyway, sorry, Cookie. But we should probably get right to what the people want.
I was thinking, when's the last time we've had as much big media news? Maybe when Tucker was fired, which is not that long ago. But what a time to be yakking about the press.
Best wretch ever.
We have only one item on the front page. Basically, all our other ones are A32, which we'll get to. But so Chris Licht, the other Chris is no longer really the other Chris.
That's right.
In that he was fired from his position as chairman and CEO of CNN on the heels of a 15,000-word Atlantic profile.
So long.
By my friend and former colleague Tim Alberta that ran last Friday.
Let's do a TikTok first. So Chris Licht got the job, what, a year ago?
A year ago, 13 months ago, in April of 2022.
And he got the job because CNN was acquired in a deal with Discovery.
They became Warner Brothers Discovery.
And the David Zaslav, the CEO of the parent company,
Warner Brothers Discovery, yeah,
had a mandate from one of his...
I think that's been a little bit overhyped.
Okay.
The comments of a board member, which I think deserved attention, and we covered them at the Beacon. His name is John Malone.
Okay.
He went on CNBC in 2021 and essentially said, I wish CNN would get back to just doing the news as opposed to this hysterical Trump coverage. And so, of course, David Zaslav, who is the CEO of the company, heard his board member loud and clear. But one board member doesn't have that much power.
But there was a consensus.
But there was a consensus, right.
Corporate consensus behind the idea that it was time for CNN to move past the
strident,
highly partisan, anti-Trump, blah, 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 blah. And they did a bunch of stuff, including they cashiered Brian Stelter.
Before that, I would say they came up with a reason to push Jeff Zucker out.
Well,
that was, okay, he's having an affair with, but it wasn't like a real, to me, in my opinion, but that's why we do this show, it was like a BS reason to push him out. It was an open secret. This woman was also very powerful. He was wrong.
It was the wrong thing to do.
They wanted to push him out for other reasons, because of his vision, because he was the architect of the strident anti-Trump turn the network had taken, and they wanted to install somebody who would take the network in a different
direction. And it wouldn't be unreasonable
to
want new leadership.
Right. So they used that as a pretext, which Zucker himself has now said in a New York Times piece that we'll get to.
Okay.
They used that as a pretext. And they put in Chris Licht, who was the man who was supposed to...
and a man well-regarded in Washington
well-regarded
news
as a phenom for being like the wonderkind producer of Morning Joe and then Stephen Colbert's show. He's in his mid-40s. And the problem is, he had an incredibly difficult task, which was you have all these famous and ego-driven anchors who have been like their brands are being stridently anti-Trump.
Right.
And he had to cut costs and fire people.
Right.
So you're stepping into a job that is like designed to make you hated, and he was in fact hated. From the drop.
So other changes. So he
fired Brian Stelter.
Which
he fired John Harwood.
Yep.
Eventually, he fired Don Lemon.
Right. He moved the lineup around. He started the morning show, a new morning show that eventually led to Don Lemon's termination. He put Caitlin Collins in primetime. The way that here the narrative is, and then we can talk about what's wrong and right about the narrative. But the narrative is the Donald Trump town hall with Caitlin Collins in New Hampshire was the tipping point inside the organization, and that they decided that it would that CNN, which has a famously dense bureaucracy, and we don't think of it probably in these terms usually, but CNN for a news organization has now been around for a long time, right? Founded in 1981, and offices in New York and Atlanta, and that the sort of the deep state of CNN dug in its heels against Licht. And then the Alberta profile that you mentioned,
which I want to get into and talk about.
But the Alberta profile and the question about the Alberta profile, Tim Alberta, a friend of mine too, and a great writer, the question persists: why would you give access to a journalist to spend a year? Right, he got all of this access to Licht as part of this rebranding effort. And why would you do that? I don't understand the thinking behind it. Tim did a good job, but why would you do that? I guess they thought it would help.
I am totally befuddled by the giving of access to another reporter, extensive, hours long.
Yes.
Embarrassing, and people paid a lot of attention to the fact that Licht had Alberta come with him to his celebrity trainer. And I just wanted to quote a little bit from this article. Alberta writes, 3 years ago, Licht weighed 226 pounds. Worried that he was losing control of his lifestyle, he went all in. No more breakfast, no drinking during the week, no more carbs or sweets. I'm an effing machine, Licht told me one day when I asked why he was skipping a meal. He also found Masonette, whose gym, J-Train, caters to New York's elite, actors, athletes, business tycoons. On This Morning in March 2023, the CNN boss was down to 178 pounds. Licht jumped off the machine. At Masonette's instruction, he squatted down to grab a long metal pole lying flat on the ground. Zucker couldn't do this.
Blank.
Blank. Licht said through clenched teeth, hoisting the pole with a grunt. And I think it like the granting of that kind of access bespeaks a lot of hubris, which is that you're going to come off good.
I mean, there's a thing where you say, we're going to give the reporter access and I'm going to charm him. I'm going to charm the reporter. The Sean McCreesh episode continues to be a touchstone for us, which is if you have a good profile writer, and Tim Alberta is a good writer, you say, I'm going to let this guy in, and he's going to be charmed by me, and he's going to tell a story that is flattering of me because he's going to be so charmed by me. And I don't know if that's exactly what Chris Licht thought. I don't know who talked him into doing it. But man,
the PR reps were fired.
Yeah, PR reps were fired. Yes.
There were a couple other things I thought were really interesting. And I like, in my view, the Town Hall and the Atlantic profile were merely the straw that broke the camel's back. This job clearly wasn't going to work out for Chris Licht. And it made me reflect on, like, was this a doable job? And then what were the preventable mistakes he made? what could he have done differently? And one of the things I thought about in terms of my own management as well was that I don't think it was smart for him. He essentially came in and said the direction that Zucker took this network was bad, knowing that Jeff Zucker was a beloved newsroom leader. And we've got to be more centrist. And he was pretty strident about that.
Coming down and taking meetings with Republicans, trying to, and everything that he was saying was getting leaked out of CNN, that he was trying to take the network rightward.
And he also said it himself. And I think, like, one of the things I thought about, and, I came into running the Free Beacon, and I'm not comparing these two things. He had, like, a much bigger job, but, I
can also lift heavy metal poles.
I had an enormous amount of respect for my predecessor, Matt Continetti, and I thought, like, well, what would it have been like if I came into the Free Beacon and started saying, like, the direction Matt took the Beacon in was terrible, and we're going to go in this new direction. And I was like, I don't think that would have been, like, received very well. It turns out I had a lot of respect for Matt. But also, I started thinking, like, I probably should have asked Matt a lot more questions about, like, what do you think you did that made you successful here? And so in terms of Licht, I thought, like, he should have, and our friend Jack Schaefer, like, made this point in a column, given that Zucker was enormously successful, and sure, he did some things Licht disagree with, he probably should have spent more time studying, like, what were the things that made this guy
successful was Zucker?
He was successful at getting the talent on his side, which is, like, pretty important.
But he wasn't, we talk a lot about the decline in CNN ratings, but CNN had trash ratings before. Like, they were not winning. They were a low, relatively speaking, poorly rated organization, and they had no room for growth.
I totally agree with you. So let's put ratings to one side.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of just a mandate to lead the network,
yeah,
like, Licht ended up losing faith from above, and he had no faith from below.
Right.
So he couldn't lead the thing. But, like, he should have had a bit more humble pie about, like, what did the people before me get right, as opposed to only pointing out what they got wrong. And then, like, done a little bit more show, don't tell.
Right.
Like, you can fire these people without announcing why you're doing it and what point you hope to make. Like, people will get it. So those were sort of my thoughts about, like, I don't ultimately think it was a terribly doable job or remit in the sense that we've talked a lot about, well, like, who's out there to hire,
Well, and I think being the public face, so he, I think, was trying to do a Roger Ailes thing where he was the impresario, where he was the famous face, because he really got forward into that. I think that was a dubious choice because you become a lightning rod. And if you don't have the advantage that Roger Ailes had was he was starting from basically nothing, right? He was building Fox from the ground up. Coming into CNN with this deep bureaucracy and with the many problems that they have internally in terms of who's on the staff and the changes that have to be made, I think what would have worked better probably, and I hate to gainsay, I mean, as you say, this was an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. What would have probably worked better would have been water on a rock, right? To keep pushing, and to remain out of frame and be an enigmatic figure as opposed to trying to be an impresario. And that, though, would have required something important, which is a real new face. And he came to Caitlin Collins late in the game, right? That he got her on the morning show and he was doing his best to elevate her, but she was the personification of the network that he wanted to see. And that it would have been easier for him if he would have advanced faces and voices that were emblematic of what he wanted rather than being the face and voice himself.
I totally agree. Like, I think it is tremendously hard, if not impossible, to both be a celebrity and be a manager. In a lot of ways, they're mutually exclusive. And, like, for the past year, he's, like, been the story and been the celebrity. What you really want, and in a lot of ways, like, Jeff Zucker is kind of like, Licht is sort of handsome and young. Zucker's, like, more portly and old and short. Like, he was less photogenic, telegenic. Like nobody was ever snapping photographs of him. There was a certain, he was more Roger in his like look and identity. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like nobody was like, let's put this guy on TV.
Fired after a sex scandal.
Right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
He was not going to be in the gym, like pushing sleighs and all this stuff. Where
no, Roger was not pushing
You
sleighs.
really don't want to be the headlines to be about you, which is something I think like came too late when you're managing, and it's something like that I've realized without being sort of conscious of it, in that I used to do TV all the time, and like I don't miss that at all, but it is not a part of my job as a manager, really.
And
like my job is to mint new people to go get booked on TV.
That's right. That is right. And I think Licht it was a tough place for him to be. He has my sympathies. I find less sympathetic though Jeff Zucker's effort to come back to CNN, which is outlined.
This was in this New York Times piece. This
Ben
reminded
Mullen
me
in the
so
New York
much
Times
of Bob Iger and Bob Chapek at Disney, where Chapek was in that job for 13 months and Iger never left the frame, was hovering over him and trying to sandbag him. And that does seem very much to me like what's been happening with Licht at CNN.
And it also seems like sour grapes. And it also seems like, so here's the lead in Ben Mullen's piece. The seminar was to be on media leadership. Dozens of students filling a classroom at Eliana Johnson's alma mater, Yale University, in April were there to learn about the business from a man who had commanded attention in TV control rooms and corporate boardrooms for decades before a stunning exit last year. What they got was remarkable candor about that exit. Jeff Zucker, who had been president of CNN for 9 years, told the group that he believed the network's former owners used his relationship with Alison Gollust, who was also in attendance, as a pretext for removing him. 3 people familiar with his comments said. So
what candor?
What candor? I was wrong.
Something everyone can see with their own eyes.
But also, he was candid about saying that he was poorly treated.
Yes,
that's real candor. I think could CNN take Zucker back? I can't imagine a scenario in which they could take him back.
Given the direction they want to take the network, and the piece says executives at Warner Brothers Discovery believe Mr. Zucker is waging a proxy war against Mr. Licht, undermining his leadership from afar, according to 3 people familiar with their thinking. So it's hard for me to see them taking back someone they think just helped create a mess,
yes,
a PR debacle, and sandbag his successor.
And
although, they might have some respect for his success in shivving the guy.
Maybe, but
I think it's unlikely.
And don't you think it's most likely that CNN gets sold?
I do think that's a possibility. I also wonder at this point whether Zucker would want to come back and lead a network.
I think he'd love to. I think he'd love for them to come crawling
scenario,
back.
Well, yes, he'd love for them to come crawling back and say, here's the middle finger. But
I think David Rhodes. I think there are some. I think Rhodes is at the top of the former Fox, former CBS executives who's now at Sky News. I think he's at the top of the list of people who could conceivably do this.
It's interesting because I think he's also at the top of a list of someone who I think could succeed Suzanne Fox at Fox News.
Yeah, but that the Sky most certainly he would have been a better choice. But it'd be interesting to. I don't know what his contract with Sky News in Europe is and all of that stuff, but he would be one. I think CNN needs to start over for sure. But I think it's going to be starting over sold to somebody, because if you're Discovery. And the problem was, what do we really do with this thing, right? What do we do? Remember, they shut down its streaming platform because they wanted to direct it into the Discovery Plus platform, and they wanted to do all this other stuff. But CNN is, it's not a great business.
It does, I think, underline the fact that, and I was thinking about this week, that we follow this so closely. We live in Washington, where we accord status for whatever reason to people who work at CNN. But this is a business in decline that is becoming increasingly irrelevant.
Martin Pierce Headline.
And that who would want this job?
The real CNN drama is cable news' growing irrelevance. To paraphrase Tolstoy, each unhappy TV channel is unhappy in its own way, and is illustrated by the lead up to the Wednesday exit of CNN CEO Chris Licht. The cable news channel hasn't been a happy place lately. That's not likely to change now that Licht is gone. Beyond the gossipy drama behind his departure is the reality that CNN and its corporate parent, Warner Brothers Discovery, are struggling with the fallout from a decade of cord cutting. In a world where far fewer people pay for cable and where consumers face an oversupply of online news outlets, cable news channels no longer have a reason to exist. Speaking of growing irrelevance, the Sunday talk show, the Sunday shows are experiencing a change this week. As Chuck Todd announced that he is going to spend more time with his family and not anchor Meet the Press anymore, and will be replaced by Kristen Welker, who is described as a rising star at NBC News. And you and I talked about, in our text thread, talked about the significance of how we both forgot to put the story in the thread until late in the week because, and look,
the news basically washed over us.
Yeah, it was because Sunday shows, and this is something I've talked about many times before on here, Sunday shows exist because after the Newton-Minnow vast wasteland period where broadcasters were being called to account for pumping garbage out across the FCC-regulated airwaves, broadcasters said, we're going to do public interest broadcasting. This is why the Tavis Smiley show or whatever sort of community broadcasting is done. And where did they put it? They put it in the least valuable. They put it in the least valuable time slot, which was Sunday morning when no one watches TV. And then it evolved into an institution in which this was the only place that you could get political coverage. Once political coverage became inescapable, the value of the Sunday show. So my sympathies to Chuck Todd and also to his predecessor, David Gregory. Everybody wanted to be Tim Russert, but there wasn't going to be another Tim Russert, and there wasn't going to be another, who was it at ABC?
Cokie Roberts?
No. Before that.
Sam Donaldson?
Even before that, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but those institutions.
He was irreplaceable, what's his name?
No. He got in trouble because he talked about Bill Clinton's solipsism one time. But these powerful panel shows, right? Face the Nation, Meet the Press, and ABC This Week. David Brinkley, thank you, Nate Moore. Brinkley.
I would never have come up with that.
So those institutions were eclipsed by cable news, which is now being eclipsed by the internet.
Yeah, you can get it all the time.
Right. Finding fatheads bloviating.
I was thinking.
Check us out on News Nation.
I was so excited, like beside myself, the first time that I ever did Meet the Press it was more than 10 years ago.
You
and
were
I was
10
just
years
thinking,
old.
Yeah, I was a phenom.
Right.
I was like, this reminds me of our friend Alex Thompson, who I think we put up the video of him doing jump rope with his arms on Jay Leno when he was like 12. But how much has changed in that they don't drive? They used to drive the news for the week,
right?
Because
had
the
to watch
politicians
the
would
Sunday
sit down and do interviews Sunday, and that would set the agenda for the week. Just how much has changed.
Chuck Todd also, I think it's worth noting with Chuck Todd, this was a long struggle against the MSNBC left.
Totally.
That Chuck Todd, who is very left, was insufficiently progressive in his efforts. And so this was, he was ultimately sacrificed to this. And I don't think he ever really figured out how to do TV, right? I don't think he ever quite grasped a persona that was good on TV. But anyway, condolences.
I thought he was fine, actually.
Nah.
But that's me.
They can't all be Tony Snow.
Should we talk 2024?
Let's do it.
Okay. Up first, we got the New York Times. This is like New York Times coverage of Republicans trademark. trademark.
Noah Rothman writing, our friend Noah Rothman, the great Noah Rothman writing in the National Review. New York Times reporters Jonathan Weissman and Trip Gabriel began with the challenge: how to make the square peg of the most diverse field of Republican presidential aspirants in memory fit into the round hole of Republican voters' presumed racism. And he goes through and dissects the thing in which Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and others, that they're actually here's the money paragraph: in bolstering their own bootstrap biographies with stories of discrimination, they have put forth views about race that are at times appear at odds with their view of the country, often denying the existence of a system of racism in America while describing situations that sound just like it. Huh?
That bleeds right into, I think, Tim Scott's appearance on The View, which we should play a clip of.
Let's hear what happens to Sunny Hostin when she tries to school Tim Scott on being black.
And one of the reasons why I'm on the show is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception. I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not, actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah, so the fact of the matter is we've had an African-American president, African-American vice president. We've had 2 African-Americans to be secretaries of the state. In my home city, the police chief is an African-American who's now running for mayor. The head of the highway patrol for South Carolina is an African-American.
Still exceptions.
In 1975, there was about 15% employment in the African-American community. For the first time in the history of the country, it's under 5%.
40% homelessness.
And 50% of the folks in our community
get 13% of the population.
You had a chance to ask the question. I know that I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
That is true.
Now, this is significant, yes, because of the presumed racism part, but it's also interesting because Tim Scott demonstrates here something that Republicans have to remember. And as they get ready to do their debates, and as they get ready for, as Ron DeSantis figures out how to try to run for president, really, hostile media is good for you, right? It is good to face adversarial interviews. It is good to be in those situations. The place where you screw up.
Well, it's good if you can perform in them.
Well, but that's what I mean. If you can't perform, you're going to lose anyway, right?
Yeah.
You cannot keep unless you are, especially. So if you're a Democrat, maybe, but if you're a Republican, you're not going to ascend to the presidency if you don't know how to do a hostile interview. Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump became president because of his ability to deflect media attacks on him back to the Republican base. And as Republicans think about how to do debates, they have to understand if you can't handle Sunny Hostin, right, you're not going to be able to handle running for president in a general election.
Up next.
Oh, I love this. A great piece in The New Republic. The arrogance of already crowning Trump the Republican nominee. The press dismissed him in 2016. Why believe their bullish predictions now? And I co-sign this piece by Walter Shapiro, where basically he says, what hubris it is to say that you know the trajectory of the Republican nominating contest. Donald Trump is the front runner, and he is the most likely to win the Republican nomination. I would have said the same thing about Jeb Bush accurately in the spring, late spring and summer of 2015. It doesn't turn out that way because stuff changes. And the obsession with, as these people announce, Chris Christie announces for president, he has no chance. Though Chris Christie has no chance. Mike Pence announces for president. Though Mike Pence is very unlikely to win, blah, 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 blah. Look, you can be realistic about their chances, but a little humility, please. It's not like we know what, as I wrote in the Dispatch, subscribe today, we have more than 500 days to the presidential election. Many, many things will happen. We may get what is most probable, which is a rematch of 2020 with a similar result. But it may be very different, and we don't know the ways in which it will be different.
I totally agree with that. Having lived through 2016, who would have thought Trump would be the nominee in that contest? Jeb Bush was, in the beginning, heavily favored. All the donors got behind Marco Rubio. And the thing that happened was, first of all, nobody expected Trump would be the nominee. And then nobody expected that Trump would actually win. So I'm with you.
I'm going to go out of order. Well, first I want to read this good paragraph from Shapiro. We simply don't know what will happen next year. Yes, uttering the deadly words "I don't know" will automatically get you booted off cable TV. But humility in the face of an uncertain future remains the only sensible mindset for assessing the 2024 terrain. And I'll tell you this, that's not true. I agree with the premise, but it's not true. Check out, I'll have a plug within a plug. I'll have a plug wrapped with a plug, which is, that's what we're trying to do on News Nation. And I'm here to tell you 3 or 4 days a week, I don't know. But speaking of what happened in 2016 and Marco Rubio, I'm going to go out of order here, and we'll come back to your thing.
This was amusing.
Just to get it. Marco Rubio on Twitter. Any political reporter / commentator claiming Chris Christie, quote, ended, close quote, my campaign in 2016 is lazy or dumb. NH debate sucked because, get ready, instead of hitting back when attacked like I wanted to, I listened to advice about, quote, pivoting and not, quote, punching down on a CC who was at 7% and about to drop out. But it didn't end my campaign. After New Hampshire, I finished second in South Carolina and Nevada, won 3 primaries, almost won Virginia on Super Tuesday, finished with the 3rd most delegates behind Trump's historic campaign, and was reelected twice by 8 and 17 points. But he also talked about...
Okay, can we just, pause on that for a second?
But the original tweet, he must have edited this tweet, because the original tweet that he talked about his bad advice, he says that here. He says, I listened to advice about pivoting and not punching down. Yeah, but I thought it was even more sharp. But this is give me a break, dude.
This tweet to me captured why he is not president and why we should be thankful he's not president, because blaming other people for the mistakes that you as the ostensible leader made is such a bad look, even though he's correct. He's right in his media criticism, but take responsibility.
He's only a little right. And first of all, it was 7 years ago. So maybe be cool. But he's wrong in this way. Marco Rubio's campaign was flailing, right? When he went into that, because just as you said, he was the thinking man's Ted Cruz. He was supposed to be the alternative who was a conservative, the more conservative alternative to Jeb, but who was not as much of a panderer as Ted Cruz. And it was
who had a compelling personal story.
Hired
reach
smart
a general
people.
Election audience.
Yep. And was it's sort of like if Marco Rubio were as talented as Tim Scott, if Tim Scott would have had the lane that Marco Rubio did, he would have done much better with it. A senator with conservative bona fides, a compelling personal story, What I find interesting about Rubio's retelling of this, reimagining of this, is he leaves out the part where he was sucking wind, right? That Jeb Bush had dropped $110 million on him in negative ads, that Marco Rubio's campaign had not realized its potential. And then Christie, by eviscerating him in that debate, made plain what people were already suspecting about him. So Chris Christie didn't end his campaign, but he hastened the end. He expedited, he helped undo him. And I think, speaking of just to reiterate your point, when George W. Bush lost New Hampshire to John McCain in 2000, do you know what he did? He said, "It's my fault. I should have listened. I'm sorry." That's what he said to his staff. That's what he said to his people. That's what you're supposed to do when you have a bad outing. You say, "It was my fault and I'm sorry." You don't say, "I listened to bad advice from people." Boo.
This follows on perfectly. Was it last week that we talked about the Politico's hit job on Casey DeSantis?
Yes.
That quoted Roger Stone characterizing her as Lady Macbeth. Well, the Daily Beast has a follow-up to that
Not
this
to
week.
be
So
outdone.
this is a trope that we're going to see by Katie Baker, the executive editor of the Daily Beast. The headline is Casey DeSantis is the Walmart Melania. And the subheadline is Trying Too Hard. She'd better hope that pleather is pudding proof. A reference to Ron DeSantis supposedly eating pudding out of a thing with his fingers, plastic container. So she writes criticizing the fact that Casey DeSantis at a motorcycle ride political event convened in Iowa by Joni Ernst. She wore a leather jacket, and she said Casey DeSantis' coat is just like her husband Ron DeSantis' campaign, crude, grasping, saying the ugly part out loud, whereas Trump would wink at the fascists who can forget his dog whistle to the very fine people on both sides at Charlottesville.
Who could forget?
DeSantis wants to peel off Trump's base by being even more explicit about who he intends to target. You can see it right there on his wife's jacket. DeSantis' Florida is where the woke go to die, and a lot of other people die as well.
Okay, that's funny. This is a very nasty piece, but that is a funny line.
So you can see the tropes developing.
It's hard to say one thing, to say one is reading too much into a coat that's so explicit. And anyways, as the New York Times noted in a fawning profile, yeah, the New York Times wrote a fawning profile of Casey DeSantis. I'm sure that's true. I'm just sure that it was a fawning profile. This is weird and obsessed. Neither Melania Trump nor Casey DeSantis could ever embody the class and effortless grace of Michelle Obama or Dr. Joe Biden. Jeez Louise.
Wow.
Oh, meatball follow-up file. Let Ron DeSantis identify however he wants. Now, Philip Bump at the Washington Post is being mean to Ron DeSantis, but being kind in another way, because he talks about, and I think this is really worthwhile, which is that for the Italian-American community, pronunciation is fungible, right? And that people, and this is true in a lot of immigrant groups. My last name, we were immigrants a long time ago, but the Steigerwalds became Steyerwalds, and immigrant groups changed their name, and that is part of that. Perhaps the confusion around Ron DeSantis and Ron DeSantis.
All right.
What else you got?
Do we have to talk about this Jen Psaki and James Comey thing?
Come on.
Oh, Lord.
Come on.
Oh, Lord. All right. Jen Psaki and James Comey game out 2024 scenarios involving Trump, quote, wearing an ankle bracelet while accepting the nomination. This is in Mediaite. Psaki and Comey amused themselves over the precognition?
Precognition?
I just learned a new word.
I guess.
Over
It's
the
a word we don't
precognition
need. Yeah.
of the latter's quip, Lordy, I hope there are tapes from 2017. Since Trump is facing legal battles on multiple fronts, Psaki asked Comey if he was concerned that Trump could become the GOP nominee before these cases go to trial. I could. I don't want to, but I could, Comey said. It's crazy. It's a crazy world that Donald Trump is dragging this whole country into, but he could be wearing an ankle bracelet while accepting the nomination at the Republican convention.
To interview James Comey on these matters, I'm trying to think of what the Fox comparison to this would be to have like Sean Hannity interview Steve Bannon about January 6th. Like, James Comey is so thoroughly discredited, and after his catastrophic tenure at the FBI, where he has been made a laughingstock of.
To have Jen Psaki, the former press secretary of the Biden administration, do the interview of the guy who presided over the BS investigations of Trump.
I can't imagine the thinking that went into.
And it is interesting that this is where CNN's ratings went, to MSNBC to consume this content.
Well, this is what
Yes.
This is what the addicted want, right? Which is this sort of cosplay, this live action role playing of the alternate history in which James Comey did not screw up so thoroughly, royally in 2016 that he was not humiliated, that Andrew McCabe and others in the FBI being prosecuted. It's just like woof.
this actually leads perfectly into our
speaking of
next
just wolf.
item. Well, those two are in the land of conspiracy theories involving Russiagate and the FBI and Trump wearing an ankle bracelet while he accepts the Republican nomination. Tucker Carlson's show debuted on Twitter. He had and I think there are a couple notable things. First of all, as of right now, and I want to click through, we're recording Thursday morning, and Twitter shows that it has 104.7 million views. That's
a lot of
enormous.
views. That's a lot of views.
That is what Twitter is showing.
That's a third of the nation.
And so tons of views. The other interesting thing is that it's only a monologue, no guests, and it's 10.5 minutes long. So the show is just the monologue, and it's gotten shorter. And the third interesting thing is that it is, I would say, like back-to-back conspiracy theories suggesting to people, to viewers, that everything that they're told is a lie. And well, I'm on the right. I share some of Tucker's views. He goes on, and I think we should play the clip to say that, like, what you're told about 9/11 and the JFK assassination and all of that, he takes, like, the full-on conspiracy theory view of things. So let's play that.
The media lie. They do. But mostly they just ignore the stories that matter. What's happened to the hundreds of billions of US dollars we've sent to Ukraine? No clue. Who organized those BLM riots 3 years ago? No one's gotten to the bottom of that. What exactly happened on 9/11? Well, it's still classified. How did Jeffrey Epstein make all that money? How did he die? How about JFK? And so endlessly on. Not only are the media not interested in any of this, they are actively hostile to anybody who is.
Okay, what about, so that's a lot. And Alex Jonesian.
And so what I think is interesting is that he links all these different things together to say, like, there is a full, that every single one of these things, 9/11, the JFK assassination, the Russia war, every single one of these things is a lie, as opposed to, like, considering them discreetly. And then the thing he really talks about for about 6 minutes here is the Russia-Ukraine war. And he says it's a problem that we're supposed to take for granted, that Ukraine is the good guy, Russia's the bad guy, we should support Ukraine. And he criticizes Nikki Haley, among others, for saying that Ukraine's security is America's security, and says she gives no arguments for this. He also doesn't give arguments for his side.
Right. It is an emotion-based appeal. And of course, he's just saying, we're just asking questions. We're just asking questions about 9/11. We're just asking questions. How come they don't want us to know the truth? I want to know about the allegations of anti-Semitism.
I listened to this carefully, and I think he steps right up to that line, and I think it is intentional. He calls Zelensky sweaty and rat-like, a comedian turned oligarch, a persecutor of Christians, and says something like he's in the pocket of BlackRock, or he's doing the bidding of BlackRock. Zelensky he's half Jewish, but he is a prominent Jewish politician on the world stage. The BlackRock thing seemed to me totally out of nowhere. Did I miss something?
Sweaty rat-like comedian
and
oligarch.
scurrying around. Zelensky, BlackRock. I'm actually looking that up right now. Oh, so he met with the BlackRock chief. I mean, give me a break. I think he is, like, intentionally deploying classic anti-Semitic tropes. But of course, that's the ultimate conspiracy theory.
Right.
Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
Kanye, who he interviewed. So let me make an analogy. Speaking of Jews in the news, Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder. So the two of the funniest movies ever made in history are Young Frankenstein and, of course, Blazing Saddles. Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles represent the tension, the creative tension between Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder, his star. And in Young Frankenstein, it's more cerebral. It's a more cerebral kind of humor that is the Gene Wilder's a little more sophisticated version. There's still some broad gags in it, but it's a little bit more esoteric. Blazing Saddles is more of Mel Brooks's slapstick, campfire scene, all that stuff, and less of the Gene Wilder esoteric, but it's still in there, and the jokes are very smart, and there's context and subcontext and lots of interesting stuff. The tension between the two of them made really good movies. The creative tension between the two of them made really good movies. Brooks without Wilder and Wilder without Brooks were not nearly as funny as they were when they were pushing against each other. And the Mel Brooks stuff without him, the subsequent stuff, Robin Hood Men in Tights, a favorite in my family, but not not the equal of those other two. And Tucker Carlson may have been in a very sweet spot when he was in tension with having people at Fox who were reining him in, right? So the creative tension for Tucker Carlson that was beneficial may have been having someone to say, actually, you can't say that the Jewish president of Ukraine is a sweaty, rat-like oligarch who persecutes Christians. That's probably too far, because there would have been somebody in the room who was Jewish, or there would have been somebody in the room who was like, this is not where we want to go. And there is something to be said for creative tension. There's a lot to be said for creative tension, and there's a lot to be said against self-indulgence. This is why our podcast is so good. This is why it's so good.
Should we talk about Ukraine coverage?
Yeah, I did want to say a word. There's been a lot of complaining about the restrictions that the Ukrainian government and military are placing on Western reporters in Ukraine. You know who else places a lot of restrictions on reporters? The United States government. If you want to go into a war zone, you want to cover the war, you're going to have to accept these limitations. As a press freedom question, I think this is Max Tanney at Semafor. No, it's Ben Smith at Semafor, writing about this tension, about journalists complaining about the Ukraine's limitations. I'm sure it's limitation. I'm sure it's not free press. I'm sure it's not like covering the United States. But then again, I don't expect the Ukrainian military to do that. Now, there is also a story that the New York Times did as proof of this concept about how the tension. Don't you've noticed this thing that happens. There's coverage about how this is sort of like the Ron DeSantis phenomenon. There's coverage about how if they're not nicer to the press, he's going to get bit. And then here's the bite. The New York Times, Nazi symbols on Ukraine's front lines highlight thorny issues of history. You're like, oh, I see what's going on. So the coverage of this is not new, right? These are militia groups. These are guys in militia groups who hearken back to anti-Soviet, Nazi, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so I just, the battle over how butt-kissy the Ukraine coverage is and where we are in that is something that we will keep tracking.
You know, there was an interesting story that a liberal blogger in Florida, and it wasn't much covered, was arrested for leaking the excerpts of.
Oh, yeah. What's the file on this one?
Tucker Carlson's show that got a lot of play. And in the aftermath of Carlson's firing, I would say it was like standard fare.
Yes.
Among reporters, commentators,
widely speculated
to say that Fox News was leaking these against Carlson. And Mediaite had an interesting piece. The headline was, "Is anyone going to retract their baseless claims that Fox News leaked the Tucker tapes?" And I remember we talked about this here and saying that I was skeptical that Fox News was leaking these because they didn't really make Tucker look bad.
No, they made him look because he's joking. This is where he's joking with Piers Morgan and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so Alex Griffin at Mediaite writes, with the revelation that federal authorities are investigating a potential hack at Fox News, the question remains, will any of the figures who baselessly accused Fox of being behind the leak retract their comments? While the investigation continues and the source of the leak still remains uncertain, all the information that has come to light in recent weeks only has served has only served to further reinforce the notion that Fox leadership was not behind the leaks, no matter how juicy a media drama it would make. And this really reminded me of the coverage of the Trump administration, where I think there's something in the water that because Fox is a bad actor, has been a bad actor, there's an idea that, like, you don't have to abide by the same journalistic rules or principles because Trump is a bad actor. Like, you can be sloppy, you can get things wrong. It doesn't matter. Nobody's really going to call you on it. And it's crap. I saw it so much covering the Trump administration where there was so much more leeway to be sloppy. And I think the same is true of Fox. And this is a good example.
Okay. Speaking of sloppy, Roy Schwartz, is he a founder of?
Yes, a founder.
Of Axios.
Former Axion cookie.
Yes. If this is going to cost you your multi-million-dollar payout on Axios, we'll stop
Cookie
anytime
wouldn't
you
be
want.
here producing our show if he had the multi-million.
What are you kidding? I'm a
payout.
rich millionaire. My doctor says to do this for my health. Okay. Caddyshack quotes for $10 million. All right. Roy Schwartz, who describes himself as the other Axios founder, is beefing with the New York Times because the New York Times had a bullet point in their article that said why it matters. And at least they didn't have be smart, but they did this. And he said, it's one thing to copy stories without credit, but the New York Times is copying the entire Axios format, ! Come on, Meredith Levien, AGSNYT.
That's Arthur Schwartz.
Oh, and New York.
Or not Arthur, excuse me. It's Arthur Sulzberger. Excuse me.
And NYC Scribe. Surely you have your own ideas.
Yeah.
And if you're going to copy something, don't copy Axios's patronizing.
But also, simmer down, Roy. Simmer down.
They didn't say be smart. They said why it matters.
You know, you guys made out like bandits. You're doing very well. You don't need to snipe at people.
Be smart. Don't be so.
Be smart. I think this violates some of the rules of your Finish Line newsletter that talk about, how to live your best life.
That's right. Okay. Associated Press, LGBTQ kids of color feel less welcome at school as bans become law. The complaint about the AP story is twofold. Number one, it's factually wrong in a couple of places. But significantly, they're frightening children. This is the Associated Press frightening children, saying that across the district, panels and parents and students told the board stories of slurs, hate speech, and sometimes violence directed towards transgender children. But other adults pressed forward in their effort to restrict inclusion. During one board meeting, when a transgender student was speaking, rather than listening, a group of parents whispered to each other. One adult audibly asked, "Is that a girl?" Recently, Tennessee passed a bill that would protect teachers from discipline or other consequences if they misgender their students. At the time, this is one of the girls talking about, and she said she thought about how routine a day it was, taking away a whole group of people's rights to be who they are. That's just like this is a typical day. I think I was more scared that was a reality than I was sad about the bill itself. And the bill does not ban, as they ask the children about, the children talk about, does not ban the teaching of African-American history. That's not what it does. Beyond
that, the reporting here does not verify or confirm any of these incidents. It is a bunch of gossip and hearsay. It says parents and students told the board stories of slurs, hate speech, violence directed toward their children, but other adults, and the language they use, pressed forward in their effort to restrict inclusion. That is not an accurate characterization of what.
And they're using
here.
using children as pawns, right? It was really most unfortunate. I want to say a quick word about Pat Robertson, and I do this for fear that it will go in the don't care bucket. But Pat Robertson, who died as we're recording this, his death was announced today. And the significant thing about Pat Robertson that's being focused on in the political press is about the way that he fused evangelical Christianity with the Republican Party and conservatism and all of that. And he did run for president, and that's all very true. But the significance of Pat Robertson historically in America, that was something that was going to happen. The significance of Pat Robertson is that he brought high production value television, news style TV to evangelical television. So there had been religious broadcasters from the first broadcast that has been a mainstay. You can go back to Father Coughlin. You can go back throughout. Religious broadcasting has been a big business. What Pat Robertson did with his 700 Club and the Christian Broadcasting Network was bring high value production to Virginia Beach and put forward a product that spoke to all of these Christians across America at a time of the evangelical eruption around the country. And Pat Robertson, it got very weird. I'm not saying it didn't get very weird, but he was, whatever else he was an excellent TV producer and changed the way religious broadcasting was by making it a high-end product that it had not been before.
Chris, that brings us to...
It's time.
Our style section. And first up, we have Mark Zuckerberg slamming the New York Times, which claims that he was choked out at a jiu-jitsu tournament after a ref said he started to snore while in the chokehold. This is the Daily Mail story. So the quote is, "That never happened. Mark Zuckerberg slams New York Times." And they write, "A clip of him wrestling on the floor and trying to break free from an opponent who pinned him down on the mat went viral. That never happened," Zuckerberg wrote in an email. "There's something so primal about it. I don't know. Since then, I've just introduced a bunch of my friends to it." He's talking about how he loves jiu-jitsu.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Which is like regular jiu-jitsu, but it has less hair.
But anyhow, he clearly is very prideful about his performance.
He is, and the New York Times is mean to him. All right, so I love this. Speaking of the things that the New York Times does well, do you know who Hannah Gadsby is?
No.
Okay, so she is an Australian comedian who is very upfront about her hatred of the patriarchy and her identity as a woman of same-sex attraction. And look, I don't like dunking on people. I don't like.
Okay.
No. Listen. This is important. I don't like cruelty and dunking as media. I think it's bad. But can you dunk on a dunker? And the answer is the New York Times says very emphatically. Jason Farrago at the New York Times very emphatically proves that, yes, you can dunk on a dunker. So the Brooklyn Museum of Art had a installation for Hannah Gadsby's. It's Pablo-matic, which is an attack on Pablo Picasso's work. And what this writer does is give the Brooklyn Museum and Gadsby exactly what they deserve, which is, okay, you want to be taken seriously. You want to bring your riff on Pablo Picasso being a pig into the museum and talk about it. Let's talk about it. And he does them the favor of taking them seriously. And if you enjoy people being set ablaze and shot out of a cannon into the sun, this is the takedown that you can enjoy with real pleasure.
And Chris, you were also very excited about the. I actually just ate at McDonald's for the first time in a long time, and it was amazing. But you were very excited about the new purple shake.
This is courtesy of Vine Pear. Behold the nostalgic purple silliness that is McDonald's
really
Grimace
good.
Shake. So but what I found interesting in the coverage of the new Grimace Shake at McDonald's is they're bringing in the backstory. They're bringing out the origin story of Grimace, who started out as evil Grimace in 1972. It was a dark time in America, and the Watergate era Nixon was evil Grimace, and how he has changed to be just a pleasant gumdrop blob and friend of Ronald McDonald. And I think Grimace needs some love, and I'm all in on the rehabilitation of Grimace.
That brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. Chris, we all saw it. Joe Biden's spill like a sack of potatoes.
Went down like a bag of wheat. Yeah.
The Air Force Academy. And that spawned the New York Times story with 4 bylines on it inside the complicated reality of being America's oldest president. And lest you think we were going to get the report of how Biden's aides have to cover for him and, plan his naps and all this stuff, which is like the real story of the Biden presidency, we got the following. Yet people who deal with him regularly, including some of his adversaries, say he remains sharp and commanding in private meetings. Diplomats share stories of trips to places like Ukraine, Japan, Egypt, Cambodia, and Indonesia, in which he often outlasts younger colleagues.
So viral.
Oh my gosh. Democratic lawmakers point to a long list of accomplishments as proof that he still gets the job done. This reminded me of covering the Mississippi Republican Senate primary in 2013 or 2014.
Nice.
When Thad Cochran ran against, what was that guy's name?
Oh, yeah.
Dark-haired guy.
Yeah, that was the guy who made Roy Moore look like Jeb Bush. Yes.
So I remember Stuart Stevens and some of the former Romney people were down running Thad Cochran's campaign. The guy had a foot in the grave. He was so old. I mean, he was like Biden, but older even. And I remember at a campaign stop, like 3 hours from the airport, Cochran was like limping along. And Stuart Stevens, who's a youngish guy and he's athletic, he bikes all over the place. He comes and he looks at the reporters and says, I can't keep up with this guy.
I can't keep up with this guy. Come on, yeah.
It was such patent
remember.
BS, but that is what is happening in this story.
While in office, and then the dark side, while in office, Mr. Trump
they have to say
concerns
he's
about
just
his
like
mental
Trump.
acuity
Yeah.
and physical
He
condition.
didn't exercise.
And Trump definitely seems crazy. There's no question about it. But that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Joe Biden is so old and seems so old.
80 looks different on different people.
You got that right. You're going to be a great old lady. I want to tell you right now. You're going to be
over
fabulous.
to you, Chris. Chris, if I'm if I'm shuffling around and stuff, I'm not going to be at my desk.
You won't be.
That's the difference.
You'll be a terror. You'll be a terror.
difference.
You'll be making it happen.
I'm not going to be at my desk.
Okay, a piece in The Guardian. This is my obsession. And it's a long-running obsession for me. Piece in The Guardian that got picked up widely. Amazon and Google fund anti-abortion lawmakers through complex shell game. Blue chip companies gave to Republican group funneling money to lawmakers who overturned abortion ban veto in North Carolina. Guess who what is the complicated shell game? What is the secret way that they're doing it? Oh, they're giving it to the Republican State Leadership Committee, which is an existing way to give money to Republican lawmakers. So if you give any money to any Republican group, you are funding anti-abortion lawmakers. That's true. So this is a very long story that makes it seem like there is some nefarious thing, some secretive thing going on here. But if you're giving money to the Republican Senatorial Committee, if you're giving money to the NRCC, if you're giving money to the Republican National Committee, you are funding anti-abortion lawmakers because the Republican Party is overwhelmingly pro-life. And what is happening, and this happened around January 6th as well, which is the goal is to lump all Republicans into one thing and say, if you support Republicans on this issue but not that issue, you can't give money to Republicans at all, because if you're doing so, and the effort to punish these tech companies for acting in their own self-interest, irrespective of the issue of abortion, is the kind of tribalistic cuckoo bananas stuff that is not your job. Not your job, Guardian.
Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we got a bunch of book recommendations, so I just wanted to highlight a few of them. The first is from Joe Palange, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, from Cleveland, Ohio. And Joe writes, first book that crossed my mind was Martin Gurri's Revolt of the Public, which I think provides important context to the strange shape of the media and political landscapes today and the correct lens with which to view it all through. Next up, David Smith from Warrenton, Virginia.
Hello,
writes,
Warrenton.
Yes. After Chris's book, Broken News, you
Well, I
cannot
like it
go
already.
wrong with George Orwell. Oh, yeah. Right,
Way to go,
coming
David
in right
Smith.
after Chris is
All
old
right,
George Orwell.
that's right.
Clear-eyed, insightful, and well-written, long-form essays like Politics in the English Language, Shooting an Elephant, Notes on Nationalism, Why I Write, and The Lion and the Unicorn are essential reading. The motherlode of his essays in the Everyman's Library's collection of George Orwell. The motherlode of his essays, is the Everyman's Library collection of George Orwell's essays. It has everything and then some and comes in at a slim 1,369 pages. It's not exactly portable, but it is a great reference for every library and still available on Amazon. In addition, his book Homage to Catalonia is an unsparing view of the Spanish Civil War, and 1984 shaped how we think about the state, media, and propaganda.
David Smith, way to
Yes.
go. Hearty endorsement. Way to go. That's a smart writing. I want to share Leonard Goodnight, a longtime friend of the pod.
I have a response to Leonard Goodnight. Do you want to read it?
Yes, Leonard
Okay.
says, I wanted to express my surprise that the people of Eliana's homeland don't love their native big box store, Target. While I no longer live in Arkansas, the West Virginia of the Mid-South, accurate, we are quite proud to be the homeland of Walmart, greatest and best of all department stores, without whom Northwest Arkansas would still be beautiful forested mountains full of hillbillies and chicken houses, all praise to Tyson. If we were our own country, we'd be as closely associated with Walmart as Sweden is with IKEA. What do Minnesotans love? Lutefisk, lakes, winter, cheese curds?
Okay, I just wanted to say, I by no means am speaking for Minnesotans. I think I am an exception to the rule.
In many things.
In many things. But I am an exception to the rule in that I think most Minnesotans feel pride in Target and all of these
Lowercase.
things. General Mills. But I have never felt at home in Minnesota. And
You got to New York as soon as you could.
Yes,
Yeah.
basically. So that's the answer to that question.
So Leonard, don't judge all of Minnesota harshly.
Definitely don't take what I say as indicative of how the people of Minnesota
Have you ever
feel.
eaten lutefisk?
No.
See.
No.
See, Leonard, she doesn't even know about
No.
it.
I know about it.
No,
but-
she doesn't deeply feel it in
no,
her bones.
no.
Yes. Okay.
And that brings us to Chris's favorite time of the week, where I am forced to say something nice. And it's a good one this week. Chris, you kick it off.
The Washington Post. So, glory, praise, and honor to my sister Janice, who flagged this. The Washington Post, the fugitive heiress next door, in which the Washington Post does cool graphics and sort of what I would describe as a true crime podcast, brings a true crime podcast energy into a long form story with all these twists and turns, fascinating graphics, really well told that they did about this great story that you'll have to read. And well done. Way to go all in on this Washington Post. Kudos.
Chris, my nice thing to say is that, Chris, you were right. Chris, last week, I said Kevin McCarthy would get no credit for his role in the debt deal. And while the Free Beacon, Drew Holden over there, did a wonderful thing about how Biden got lots and lots of praise and there was much more grudging acknowledgement of Kevin McCarthy's role, there was one piece that I wanted
At least
to acknowledge.
one, yes.
Yes. In Semafor, the headline was, and we saw it right after we left this podcast last week, did Washington underestimate Kevin McCarthy? And in that piece, Joseph Zebelos Roig and others write, the superlatives may be a little over the top, but McCarthy's allies have a point. The national press and much of official Washington appears to have underestimated the man. Instead, McCarthy pulled off a legislative two-step, forcing Biden to the negotiating table by rallying Republicans behind a deeply partisan bill hardliners would agree to, then keeping the right on board just long enough to hash out a viable compromise. Conservatives may be unhappy with the final bill, but for now there doesn't appear to be any serious effort to topple McCarthy. So, Chris, you were right.
I'll
and
treasure
that is
this.
my nice
I'll
thing
treasure
to
this
say.
in my heart for all times.
Yes. Well, that is the news we have about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com. and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches for Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Cookie Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches, and don't forget to leave a 5-star review.